All right, we'll go ahead and we'll get started with class tonight. It's good to see everybody. Um, I guess I'll start off by just saying when we started the book of Daniel, we informed you that you could kind of divide the book of Daniel in half, with the first half being some stories, some narrative that was kind of easy to understand, kind of easy to follow, things such as Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, um, the early life of Daniel, him being carried into captivity in Babylon. Those things were kind of easy to follow, but they had a very important message. And that is what we always call the theme of the book of Daniel, and that is that God rules in the kingdoms of men. And then the second half of the book, we said, was some more difficult to interpret visions that Daniel is going to have. And the language, it seems like, in the second half of the book is a lot different than what it was in the first. You have language that is called sometimes apocalyptic literature, which is also the way the book of Revelation is written as well. So, tonight, what we have on our plate is we have one more story in that narrative, and it's probably the most famous story that everybody knows, the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And I'm going to kind of hit the high points of that story, and then we're going to get into that second half of the book, starting with chapter 7, and we're going to look at some of those visions and prophecies. I would like to say one thing to introduce that part of the book, though. It's extremely amazing to look at these prophecies that are in the second half of the book of Daniel. And when you hold them up, which Daniel couldn't do this, but we can. When you hold up the prophecies that are in the second half of the book of Daniel, compare it with what we know about history. The accuracy of the prophecies in the book of Daniel is just mind-boggling. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of critics who try to disclaim the book of Daniel and say there is no way that was written back during Daniel's time because it's just too accurate. But it was accurate because it was inspired by God. But we'll get into that here in just a little while. But if you will, go ahead and take your Bibles, if you hadn't already, and turn to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. We finished chapter 5 by saying in verse 30 that very night Belshazzar, do y'all remember Belshazzar? He was the king that was set up over the province of Babylon itself, the city of Babylon. He was the ruler there, and if you'll remember, he's the king that saw the handwriting on the wall. We talked about that. Okay, but in verse 30 it says, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So, we see a transition here, right? If you remember anything from Daniel chapter 2 and the image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about, what did that image symbolize? Remember, it had a head, it had a chest. Yes, it symbolized kingdoms that would kingdoms from Daniel's time on after Daniel. It symbolized those kingdoms. The first one, the head, was Babylon. And we are going to see the transition here after Belshazzar is slain. We're going to see the transition from that Babylonian power over to the power of the Medes and Persians with Cyrus taking over the region. So, chapter 6, Darius has been set over this area. And it says it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. So, Darius has set up these leaders around the region to make it easier on himself to rule. And Daniel is going to be put in a high position by Darius. And what normally happens, what do other people normally do when you are given a high position above them? They get jealous. That's right. A lot of times we see jealousy and strife come upon people, and that's what we see happen when Darius is going to give Daniel this position in his kingdom. It said, so what happens is these governors and these leaders, they go and they try to find some type of charge that they can bring up against Daniel to where he can't get this position and they can. The only problem is we're talking about Daniel here. And we're talking about a man that's probably in his 80s by this time. And what charges could they bring against him? None. We have an 80-something-year-old man here, and he has no charges that they can find to bring against him except one thing. The only thing that you know about Daniel is that he's going to do what? He's going to serve his God. He's going to serve his God. Brother Mike and I were talking the other night. We were down at the youth camp and just carrying on a conversation, and he mentioned to me that if you looked up the definition of integrity, all of the qualities that would make up integrity, Daniel would fit those qualities. And to live this long and to not have any charges that they could formally bring against him just shows you the integrity that Daniel has. But they know that he's going to serve God. So here's what they do. Verse 6 of chapter 6. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. So basically what we have here is you have these leaders that he has given responsibility to. They come to him and they tell him, this is what we need to do. We need you to sign this decree. And of course, Daniel's not present at this. So Darius has these men around him that he trusts. I mean, he trusts them enough to put them in this position. So he says, okay, I'll do it. But there's one thing that appeared to be a problem when the Medo-Persian king signed something. And what was that problem? Couldn't be changed. You could not undo it. So it says in verse 9 that King Darius signed the decree. Now, I want to kind of focus in on verse 10. I want to focus on Daniel here. It says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God. You know, that would, as I was studying and I was looking at this, I couldn't help but think of what a difficult situation that would have had to have been. And I know for me, it would have been very difficult for me, knowing that that decree was signed, to have went ahead and prayed anyway. I would have tried to think of any way that I could possibly do it to try to get around that punishment. But when you look at Daniel, he doesn't think twice about it. It doesn't bother him one bit. He is that focused on serving God. You have anything else as far as that goes? Or does anybody have anything to add to that before we go any farther? Yes.
I'm curious what those prayers might have been. I'm sure they were a little different than maybe the norm, or maybe they wasn't.
Right.
I would think with that decree being signed, he would be praying for protection.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. And I was about to say something about that. I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things I thought of that I might have done is I might have tried to do it in secret where nobody could have seen me. But Daniel didn't. He goes and opens this window because he's not afraid. He knows he has God on his side. But that window being open actually kind of helps the story to continue, because that's how he's going to be seen. That's how he's going to be caught doing it. And that's going to continue the story. Okay. Let's skip down to verse 14. But before I read that, let me mention that when the king found out that this was Daniel, it discouraged him, because Darius really liked Daniel. I mean, he was putting him in a governmental position here, and Daniel was one of his men. And when he finds out that he has signed something, been tricked into signing something that was going to take Daniel's life, he is extremely displeased and very sad. In verse 14, the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it's the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes can be changed." So the king gave the command and brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Now that's an amazing thing to look at right there. A pagan king with that type of confidence, knowing that Jehovah God will deliver Daniel, even though he puts him in this situation.
Don't you think they kind of lied about Daniel too, because they said he didn't really respect the king? And I mean, he didn't follow that order, but that doesn't mean he didn't.
Yeah.
He respected the king. He wanted what was good for the king and the nation.
Yeah, that's right, and we know that to be true, because there's a verse in here where he shows that respect to him, but I can't think exactly what verse it is. But yes, he does respect the king, and I think their trickery is evident here.
In verse 21, he says, "O king, live forever." I don't know if that's what you're talking about. But
anything else? Okay. It says that after he put him in the den, in verse 18, the king went to his palace and he spent the night fasting. He didn't have any musicians brought to him, and his sleep went from him. But in verse 19, the next day, the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. And the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" You can almost just paint that picture in your mind of what Darius might have seen here, and the mystery, the longing to hear Daniel's voice come out of that den, as he waited to hear him. And then in verse 21, Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. That was the one and only thing that saved Daniel from this travesty. I know I've heard Lonnie mention that in Josephus' writings, there were some people that believed that Darius might have fed the lions to keep them from being hungry enough to hurt Daniel here. But when you read the passage here, there was only one thing that kept those lions from attacking Daniel, and that was his faith in God. But after Daniel was delivered, it says that he commanded for those who had accused Daniel to be brought, their children and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever even came to the bottom of the den. But we'll finish up chapter 6 with Darius's response. Look what Darius wrote after this. He says, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." So even a pagan king here, even a king that is not one of God's kings, has the knowledge and the belief that Jehovah God is a living God and that his dominion is going to be forever. And as Larson goes into chapter 7 here, I want y'all to keep that theme in the back of your mind, is the fact that God's kingdom is going to be a kingdom that's going to live forever. Because that's one of the main ideas as we get into these visions tonight. One of the main ideas of those visions is these other kingdoms, your Babylonian, your Medo-Persian, your Greece, your Rome, those kingdoms are going to be destroyed. God's kingdom is going to last forever.
Yeah, I think Darius's decree certainly serves as a good summary of the first 6 chapters, the signs and wonders that we see that demonstrate God. Okay, so now we come into chapter 7. 7 through 12, I think, is basically all tied together. We probably will not talk a ton about 10 through 12. It's a lot to cover. And the reason we're going to focus on 7 through 9 for the most part is because I think if we get those well, then we can understand what's going on in 10 through 12 without a lot of extra work. So 7 through 12 is what Mr. Colby said earlier, apocalyptic literature. Now, when I say apocalyptic, I'm not necessarily talking about the end times. All right. So the book of Revelation, the word that we get that is revelation is the word apocalypse, right? So think of the word revelation or revealing, right? So like the magician who you get, like the Wizard of Oz, you get to pull back the curtain and see it's revealed what's really going on. All right, so like the book of Revelation, this section of Daniel, like a lot of the book of Ezekiel, is actually a pulling back of the curtains to see what's really going on. Now, one of the things that happens in apocalyptic literature is there is a lot of visual imagery that we are given. And Brother Waldron, I listened to a recording today. I was driving and I listened to a recording of him talking about the book of Daniel. When he talked about the book of Revelation, if he talked about the book of Daniel, anything like that, he would always say, do your best to try to picture what's happening. Now, every image, every symbol, I'm not going to be able to tell you what it stands for. I think we can get the big picture always. We can get some of the symbols pretty clearly. There are going to be some symbols, I just don't know what that's talking about. Maybe there are guesses that people make. Maybe I've read some of those guesses and I can tell you what they are. But for the most part, what I want to get is the big sense picture of what's going on. Understanding how to read this kind of literature. It's not, so the scriptures are clear. We can understand God's will for us. but some passages are harder to read than others, right? It's pretty easy to read Daniel chapter 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they won't bow down. I get that, right? I just have a basic education, and I can read that and understand. But especially when we get into some sections of this, it's a little bit challenging. So we come to Daniel chapter 7. And in Daniel chapter 7, if you've read ahead, what things do we, what's the imagery? What's the scene that we get? There are 4 beasts. And what happened? Where do they come from for the first part? They come out of the sea. All right. So the sea in Hebrew thinking was always the place of kind of turmoil, and oftentimes stood for like the turmoil of the world, of the nations. All right. So we get these beasts. We might just use the word animals. We get this wild animal imagery out of this. And what's the first one look like? He looks like a lion with eagle's wings. And does anybody remember what happened to that lion? His wings are plucked off, but is that a bad thing? What's happening? He's being made to stand up like a man. So here is a beast who's becoming like a man. Does that ring any bells in the book of Daniel? Kind of sounds like Nebuchadnezzar, right? I wouldn't bet my house on it. I wouldn't bet anything on it because I'm not a betting. But I wouldn't bet my house. But it kind of has an echo of Nebuchadnezzar, doesn't it? Here's this beast being turned into a man. And so we've got number 1 beast. Then we have a bear. I should have let you tell me that. And notice that it is raised up on one side. So this seems to me that maybe it's another kingdom, another king that maybe has 2 parts to it, and one is stronger than the other. Remember, we've talked about the Medo-Persians, so we're actually in the first year of Belshazzar, which is taking us back a good ways in the narrative. But anyway, okay, then there's a third image. And what is that image, or beast? A leopard, yes. And what does this leopard have? 4 heads, all right? 4 heads, and also doesn't it have 4 wings, all right? So this is a leopard that has extra horsepower, well, extra bird power, I guess, not extra. He has 4 wings, all right? So are you visualizing this in your head? Here's a lion. It's brought up to stand like a man. Here's a bear with 3 ribs in his mouth. And you say, what do those 3 ribs symbolize? And I can make up anything. I don't know what they symbolize. There are people who make guesses as to what kingdoms they symbolize. But I think that if we were to look at Daniel 7, and then we've got our 4th beast. And how would you describe the 4th beast? Pretty indescribable, right? This person has him looking like some kind of modified stegosaurus. There are qualities of him that... you've got the horns here. You've got iron teeth. Maybe we can make a point about that in a second. But we know what these beasts are. What are these beasts? What do they represent? Kingdoms. The way we know that, look at verse 17. This is jumping way. We're going to come back and look at the text in the middle. But I think if we get this idea here in in Daniel 7, that we will be helped here. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Forever, forever, and ever. All right, so these 4 beasts are 4 kings. And I think they are representative kings. Like maybe when we look at the lion, maybe that's Nebuchadnezzar. But does 4 kings or 4 kingdoms, does that sound familiar? Yeah, because if we go back to Daniel 2, we have that. And I really think that's what we're looking at. So, again, I'm not going to come down too hard on the specifics. There are people who even disagree about this lining up just like that. But I don't think we're going to miss it when we talk about the idea of these representing world empires, kingdoms, representing really kingdoms that are going to have control over the people of God. They're going to have control over the Jews, right? So we don't have anything about the Ming Dynasty in China on here. We don't have anything about the Aztecs, right? We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about those who are going to have control over the people of God. And when it comes to those, I think they line up really well. One thing that I would say, like with the bear being raised up on one side, in the Medo-Persian relationship, it seems that the Medes were actually really powerful in that. So maybe they're the stronger one. With the leopard, if it represents Greece, it has 4 heads. When Alexander the Great dies, remember his kingdom splits into 4 separate kingdoms. And then with Rome, that indescribable animal has iron teeth. You connect that to the image of Daniel 2, those iron legs, we think that represents the Roman kingdom. So it seems to me that we're talking about a parallel in Daniel 7 to Daniel 2. Now, what's the key message of Daniel 2 about those kingdoms? Do what?
God's still in control.
God's still in control, and what's coming?
His kingdom.
A new kingdom. Daniel 2 verse 44 is your key passage for Daniel 2. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. All right, so that's what we're looking. If we have a parallel, I think we'd see something like that. Well, let's go back to the text. I know we're not reading it, but we're just summarizing right now as we make our way through. So in verse 9, let me pause there for just 1 second. Can I show you something in the book of Revelation that this is just a helpful principle? We can't do this for every image. In Revelation 13 and verse 1, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like bears, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. Does that sound familiar? What is that? What does this beast look like? It looks like the beast in Daniel, but all kind of combined into one, right? This is kind of like all those represented in one power. Maybe specifically, John is talking about the Roman Empire. But what I would say is that that in the book of Revelation, this pulling back of the curtain is when there is a world empire that's trying to dominate God's people, God has a word about that. It's pictured as a beast coming out of the sea, and here it's described as kind of a combination of all those images that Daniel saw. I imagine people reading the book of Revelation, if they were good Bible students, knew that imagery. And so they were able to say, oh, a world empire opposed to God's people. That's what the whole book of Revelation is about. So when we come back to Daniel chapter 7, anything so far, I'm just kind of going on and on.
Nope.
All right, so as I look, this is verse 9. Thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. Now, that's a very Revelation-y theme, isn't it? A very Revelation-y picture. In chapter 1, when we're introduced to Jesus, he's described in a very similar way. But we've got the Ancient of Days. And what's coming from the throne? Fire, fire. Mr. Creighton just mouthed it, but I'm picking up fire. Now, we've seen other things stream from the throne of God, right? We talked the other night about water flowing from the throne of God. That's the picture in Revelation. A river flowing from the throne. There are times where rivers flow from the throne of God, and there are times where fire is flowing from the throne of God. The picture is of blessing or of judgment, and I think that's the picture here. So here's judgment flowing from the Ancient of Days. And then verse 11, I looked then because of the great sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, the horn that was on this indescribable beast, and its body. And as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So what happens to this indescribable beast that would strike fear in all of us? He's destroyed. Same thing happens in the book of Revelation, by the way. This empire that's dominating God's people will ultimately come to a fall. So here's the picture. Here are the world empires. What's going to happen to them? They're going to be brought down. God is in control. These world empires that are dominating God's people don't have the final word. They're going to be destroyed by the judgment that comes from the throne of God. And then the key passage, if you don't know any other passage from the book of Daniel, to me, maybe 2:44 would be a good competitor, but 7, 13, and 14 is really important. Because Daniel says that he saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Does that sound familiar in the book of Daniel? That's exactly what's going on in Daniel 2:44, right? A kingdom established that will never be destroyed. But now we've got a person that we're looking for. Now we've got this image of one like the Son of Man, who will come into the glory of the Father, of the Ancient of Days, and will... So imagine this. Imagine Daniel looking at this. Daniel knows who God is. Daniel knows how exalted God is. And he's looking at this, and I can imagine question marks. If you're drawing it as a comic, he's got question marks all over. A human one? Coming into the presence of the Ancient of Days and not having to fall down in just absolute terror? Not only is he in the presence, but he's granted a kingdom. He gets to sit down at the throne beside him. He's the one who's given service and worship. What is going on here? And I imagine Daniel had some questions, don't you? All right? So, one thing to keep in mind. Jesus' favorite self-description. Whenever he describes himself, what phrase does he use to describe himself? You remember? Son of Man. Son of Man. Now, I don't know if every single time he's trying to take us back to Daniel 7, 13, and 14, but I can't help it. All right? And there are a few times where he's definitely trying to take us back to there. In Mark chapter 8, when he says, 9 verse 1, he says, "Truly I say, there are some standing here who will not taste death till they see the kingdom of God come with power." In Mark 8 verse 38, which is the verse right before that, he says, "You will see the Son of Man coming in the glory of the Father, in the clouds with the Father." So he ties this image to "you will see the kingdom coming." Right? So Jesus ties himself and what's going on to that. He also ties the destruction that's going to come on the city of Jerusalem to this very same thing. And the reason that's important is that's not when Jesus got his reign, but that was one of the moments when his reign was really clearly demonstrated. If the Jews wanted to know if Jesus was sitting at the right hand of the throne of God, then they just needed to keep in mind that he had promised that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and that's exactly what happened. So Jesus uses this specific passage a couple of times to talk about who he is. And by the way, if anybody ever asks, why do you believe? For me, I would say because I believe Jesus was raised from the dead. And Jesus ties that Son of Man identity to his resurrection. And so we can go from there. Now, so this is what Daniel sees. We don't have to do a lot more with Daniel except for to say that there in one of those situations, there is... the horn raises up out of that indescribable beast, makes war on God's people, and seems to win. And so Daniel's perplexed and bothered about this. And so we'll have to kind of pick that up later on. But we're running out of later ons tonight. So anyway. Okay. Does all that make sense through chapter 7? So I don't have an explanation for every symbol, but I think we can see the big picture. Nations are going to try to dominate. That's not going to keep God from doing his thing and putting his man on the throne. And we wouldn't understand how the Son of Man could sit down at the throne of God until we understand that Jesus is God in the flesh. Right? Then he can be a Son of Man and he can be exalted into the Ancient of Days presence and sit down at the right hand. All right? Now let's come to Daniel chapter 8. We're just going to summarize here. We get some other images. We get a 2-horned ram, and we get a 1-horned goat. Right? In fact, the English Standard says he has a conspicuous horn between his eyes. All right? Now, what happens between the 2-horned ram and the 1-horned goat? They fight. And who wins? The 1-horned goat comes at the 2-horned ram, and it's just the logistics of where the horns line up. This guy's dead before. All right, so this goat, one horn goat, is going to win here. But then something's going to happen. That one horn is going to break, and it's going to break into 4, and one of those horns is going to grow in an odd and strange and dangerous way. Now, we get a little bit of help on this one. Look at chapter 8 and verse 19. Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. So I don't think we're bad in saying that Daniel 7 might refer to Medo-Persia, Daniel 2 might refer to it, because this ram here, the 2-horned one, is Medo-Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face who understands riddles shall rise. If I understand correctly, all of this is a reference basically to what's going on with Alexander the Great coming as the Grecian king. He conquers Medo-Persia, defeats them in battle. His kingdom will divide into 4 upon his death. And then one of those horns, I think he's referring to a man named Antiochus Epiphanes, who will come and will dominate Syria, which is north of Israel, and will grow to dominate them. Now, we will have to save all that for later, but I think this is the image that we're given in Daniel chapter 8. Okay. Anything else on all that?
Nope.
Okay. Would you like to say anything about Daniel 9 with the prayer? If you wanted to take that, or we can just summarize it, whatever you'd like to do.
I can, I'll hit a little of it.
Yes, sir.
All right, chapter 9, the first part of it. If you look, Daniel, let's just read the first couple of verses. In the first year of Darius, the son of, how do you say that name?
I say Ahasuerus.
Okay, sounds good. Of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. So basically what it's saying here is Daniel knows, because of what Jeremiah said, what he's seen in Jeremiah, that it is time for the Babylonian captivity to come to an end. So what he's going to do is he is going to offer this prayer up to God. He says, I prayed to the Lord, I'm in verse 4, prayed to the Lord my God and made confession and said, Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and mercy with those who love him and with those who keep his commandments, we have sinned and committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. And he continues in that prayer, including himself, even though Daniel has been faithful, he is actually praying for his people and for the Lord to deliver them.
Yeah, I think you've got 3 key things in that prayer. You've got God's goodness described in lots of different ways. You've got the people's badness described in lots of different ways. And then you've got that God brought righteous judgment described in lots of different ways. Those are the key 3 things of the prayer up until about verse 15. And
yeah.
It's kind of changed.
I'm going to pick up in verse 17. Notice at the end of this prayer, he says, now therefore our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications, and for the Lord's sake, cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. Also look in 19. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act. Do not delay for your own sake, my God, for your city and your people are called by your name. Again, I just point that out to point out Daniel's attitude there in his prayer. You know, a lot of times I know when I pray, and I feel like probably when a lot of us pray, what do we pray? We pray for our own good. We pray for our own sake. But notice in Daniel's prayers here, not everything is about him. He is looking for God's will to be done. He prays that these things will happen for God's name to be glorified.
That's right. Okay, so he prays For what? Who is he praying for? He's praying for God to be glorified, but how does he want that to happen? His people and the city, right? His people and his city. Drop down to verse 24. Gabriel comes to bring an answer. We'll meet Gabriel again. It'll be Luke chapter 1 when we meet Gabriel again, me talking to Zacharias and Elizabeth. But that'll take a little while to get to. But in Daniel 9:24, can I read 24 through 27 right quick? 70 weeks. Yours might say 77s. The word weeks there is literally the word sevens, but some translators said we're talking about 70 weeks. Okay. Are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again. Yours might be say, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks it shall be built again. We'll worry about that in a second. This is the end of verse 25. With squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half a week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wings of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. This is a really hard passage, I think. And the reason I point it out is because this is a place that a lot of premillennialists will point to and try to make their case. I can't go into all the things that people do, what I think is wrong with this passage, but here's what I think is being said. Notice that in verse 24, it's regarding the Jews and Jerusalem. You see that in verse 24? 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. So he's talking about Israel, Jews, Judah, and Jerusalem. That's who the focus is on here. Now he says 70 weeks or 77s. I think that is a figurative number, because if it's 77s, that would be 490. And some people have said, oh, this is 490 years, and in 490 years, God is going to start fulfilling his promises. I don't know how you do the math to make 490 work out, all right? And people have contrived the math in ways that I don't think makes any sense. But I think he's just talking about a complete, full period of time, 70 weeks. That's a full period of time. Now, within that 70 weeks, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be an end to transgression, an end to sin, atonement for iniquity, everlasting righteousness. There's going to be a seal for the vision and the prophet, and there's going to be an anointing for the most holy place. Can you imagine a time in which that's going to take place, especially when we think about these sin things and this righteousness thing? What do you think? In Christ, all right? So what I would say is within 70 weeks, there is this pointing to a time where all of this is going to be accomplished, right? This is going to be the answer to David's question. So here's really the answer, Daniel's question, not David's question, Daniel's question. In 7 weeks, you see that in verse 25? From 7 weeks of the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem. Now, I don't think he literally means 7 weeks, for sure. And I don't even think he means 7 years, because it takes him longer than 7 years, right? The decree will go out from Cyrus about 536, and the temple will be rebuilt finally in 516, all right? So that's going to be accomplished. Then there's going to be a 62-week period. And you notice that. For 62 weeks, it shall be built again. I think we're talking about Jerusalem with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. All right? So Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt. It's going to be there. It's going to stand, but it's going to face difficulty. For more on that, read chapter 11. We don't have time to talk about it, but that's the summary right there. The city of Jerusalem will stand during a troubled time. That's the answer. So Daniel gets an answer to his prayer. His prayer in 16 through 18 was, be with your city. What's the answer? There's going to be a return and rebuilding. And it's going to happen relatively soon, right? I would say that 7 weeks is an indicator it's coming pretty quickly. Then there's going to be a long period of time where the city is going to stand, but it's going to be in trouble. And it's going to be in trouble because it's going to be controlled by the Persians, and then it's going to be controlled by the Greeks, and then it's going to have an independence fight on its own, and then it's going to be controlled by the Romans. It's going to be a troubled time. And then in that final week, you've got several things described. I want to notice verse 27. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. I think what the 1 week is going to be is there's going to be a new covenant, and there's also going to be destruction in that last week. And I think we're pointing to the time of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem. So I think if we put all this together, Daniel gets an answer like this. Your city is going to be rebuilt, and it's going to stand for a while. And then the anointed one, the Messiah, is coming. And there's going to be a covenant made with many, and there's going to be an abomination of desolation. There's going to be destruction on the city that you're concerned about. You see that? You see how all that ties together? Now, the abomination of the desolation, I know that that's what this is connected to, because when Jesus, in his sermon about the destruction of Jerusalem, references the abomination of desolation, and Mark has this little parenthesis and says, let the reader understand. And you're like, I'm reading it and I don't understand at all. I think he's saying, if you've read your book of Daniel, the reader can understand. You can look and see, this is what God was talking about. Now, Luke's account doesn't say abomination of desolation. It says the surrounding army, when you see the surrounding army. I think what Daniel is seeing here is that the Lord is speaking to him, and he's saying, one day there's going to be an abomination of desolation. One day there's going to be the wings, there's going to be a surrounding army. That's the day that you're looking for. So Daniel gets the answer to his whole prayer in that. Let me look at one last verse. Through all of this, look at the last verse of the book of Daniel. What can Daniel do knowing that that's way down the line? What can Daniel do knowing that the city is going to be restored, that it's going to have a prosperity for a period of time, but then be destroyed? Look at the end of the very last verse of Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest, and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. That's what Daniel can do. Daniel can go his way. He's going to die, right? It's going to not be very long, I would imagine. He's going to die, and he will have rest, and he will stand in his right place at the end of the allotted time. He doesn't have to worry about what's coming way down the road, because he has been faithful to God, and God will be faithful to him. All right. I know that was a breeze of a survey on some of that, but I think we did pretty good on 6, 7, 8, and 9. And all that together, I think, helps us to understand. If you have questions about 10 through 12, I have resources that I can loan you, but we're just not going to focus on it tonight. If you'd like to know more about that kind of stuff, I can point you in some directions. So, all right. Thank you very much.
For Sunday.
For Sunday, Ezra 1 through 4, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah.
I won't be here. Mr. Colby will be taking it on his own. I'll be at a meeting in Mississippi. And then next Wednesday night, Brother Allen and Mr. Gerald are going to take it for us. We'll both be out of pocket. So, but Lord willing, we'll be all back in our right places in a couple of services. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.